Dark is a neo-western vampire film by a young farm boy named Caleb, played by young Adrian Pasdar of Heroes fame, who picks up a beautiful woman, May, played by Jenny Wright, who turns out to be more than he bargained for when a fun night out leads to her biting him and turning him into an undead vampire. He then gets snatched up by a group of roaming drifter vampires, including rambunctious Severin, played enthusiastically by Bill Paxton, Mama Bear Diamondback, played by Jeanette Goldstein, an old man stuck in a child's body, Homer, played by Joshua John Miller, all led by Jesse Hooker, played by Lance Henriksen. Then, they are about to eat the confused Caleb when May tells them he's been turned. Begrudgingly, Hooker tells her and Caleb,
"It's decided. We'll give him a week to see if we can call him one of us."
What ensues is a dark night of misadventures, including a massacre at a bar, as Caleb decides if he wants to be a vampire after all. As this is happening, he is falling in love with May, while his worried father and sister, played by Tim Thomerson and Macy Leeds respectively, desperately search for him, leading to a riveting climax. Near Dark is a second film directed by Point Break and Zero Dark 30 director Kathryn Bigelow, and her first solo directorial debut after sharing directing duties with Monty Montgomery on The Loveless. After The Loveless, Bigelow really wanted to make a Western. However, by the late 80s, before the return of the deconstructionist Western starting with Unforgiven a few years later, the Western genre was all but dead. However, what was big at the time were horror films, especially vampire films, with the back-to-back box office successes of Lost Boys and Fright Night. And Bigelow, who still wanted to make a Western, decided the best way to get that done would be to merge it with a more successful genre. So what better way than to make a vampire Western? And it worked. She eventually secured funding, around $5 million, with a De Laurentiis Entertainment Group with that pitch. Bigelow's co-writer was Eric Red, who was also the film's co-producer. Red had previously written the classic thriller Hitcher starring Rutger Hauer, whose success got him the notoriety to work on Near Dark with Bigelow. He would then go on to co-write Blue Steel with Bigelow, a stylish cop drama starring Jamie Lee Curtis, which Bigelow directed, and Undertow, which they again co-wrote together, but Red ended up directing himself. Now, this wasn't the first vampire western. That honor goes to Curse of the Undead in 1959. But Bigelow's film is certainly one of the first to do the concept well. First things first, the film is beautiful to look at. Bigelow, a former painter, gives all the compositions great consideration. Everything from the blocking to the framing and the use of color all have a painterly quality to them. This is especially true of how Bigelow lights May, making her always stand out in whatever scene she's in. The scenes also evoke the feel of old school westerns, with the use of grand sunsets, wide shots of golden plains, and cowboys riding triumphantly on horses. It also doesn't skimp on the horror iconography as well. There's the moonlit fog, the decaying alleys covered in shadow, and red-splattered, gore-soaked rooms. It's a great marriage of the two genres that fit together like a glove. It gives the film a different vibe than a genre that's usually rooted in gothic imagery, or pseudo-matrix leather-clad fetishism. All this is then complemented by a great atmospheric synth score by the band Tangerine Dream, who are no strangers to film scores, being a go-to for the director Michael Mann.
Dumb suck.
The score evokes atmospheric dread and helps ratchet up the tension as well. It's even romantic in parts. The film was also purposely more grounded than a lot of the vampire media at the time, keeping the vampire's origins and powers vague but not too outlandish. In fact, the word vampire is never ever uttered once in the entire film. Bigelow, along with screenwriter Eric Red, went even further, such as having a scene where he holds onto a gun with an explicit crucifix on it to show how that doesn't affect him. In fact, they don't seem to have any weaknesses save for sunlight, hence the title, and fire in the case of Severin's death. There's no references to silver bullets, stakes to the heart, or garlic, or any myriad of other ways to dispose of vampires in horror fiction. It makes for a film that feels more tense as the vampires, once they go on a rampage and stalk Caleb's family, feel impossible to stop. However, none of the film would function without the work of the great cast in front of the camera. Bigelow, who was friends with James Cameron at the time, and whom she would eventually marry and divorce years later, had just finished filming Aliens a few years prior, and told her about his great cast and suggested she give them a look. And she agreed. Bill Paxton, who had played the panicky Hudson, got cast as the wily and unpredictable Severin. Janet Goldstein, who played the tough as nails Vasquez, was given the role of tough as fangs Diamondback. And of course, Lance Henriksen, who played the kind android bishop in Aliens as the grim and sardonic leader Jesse Hooker. In fact, Michael Biehn, who had played Hicks in Cameron's Aliens and Kyle Reese in his earlier Terminator, was initially tapped to play the vampire leader Hooker. The vampire gang is then rounded up by young Joshua John Miller, who up to that point had mostly done television and the critically acclaimed drama River's Edge, while this was Jenny Wright's first major role, having been in smaller parts in Pink Floyd's The Wall and St. Elmo's Fire. Wright gives May a wonderful and tragic performance, and is able to evoke a sense of sensuality that never veers into exploitation or caricature. She remains grounded, human, and tragic throughout, even when we see her do some unsavory things as a vampire. This was also Adrian Pasdar's first lead role, after being in the cult classic Solar Babies. Adrian has a likable good boy charm that doesn't distract from the fact that he's kinda shitty.
Come on, Meg. Just a little touch. I ain't asking for much.
But in a weird way, that works for the film, as it keeps the tension up of will he turn to the dark side? Will he embrace the outlaw vampire lifestyle? Or will the call to home, embodied by his father's desperate investigation of his disappearance, pull him back to the light? If he had been too goody two-shoes, there'd be no tension. And if he was too unlikable, there's honestly no movie. We need to be invested in his journey, but also be worried that it might not end up well. One of the most memorable moments is the long sequence where Caleb is supposed to make his first kill, leads to a scene where May and Caleb are picked up by a kindly truck driver, and Bigelow ratchets up the tension by leaning into true empathy, as we fall in love with the driver who seems friendly, fun, and caring. The longer we stay with him, the more we like him, and the more we dread his inevitable demise. It's great filmmaking, especially since unlike most films where the protagonists are the monsters, we feel creeping dread rather than waiting impatiently for a gruesome kill. And when it happens, it's played for drama and not sensationalism. However, the rest of the vampire outlaws obviously have the more outrageous roles, with no one having more fun than Bill Paxton. He has the dangerous swagger of someone with the most intense and horrifying hair trigger, and keeps the audience on the edge of their seat in whatever scene he's in. In fact, during filming, while deep in bloody makeup, he went up to a passerby and told them, "You should have seen the other guy." Paxton keeps the character from being too one-note with his hedonistic and fun performance that stays dangerous and never veers into camp. Henriksen, meanwhile, is great as the cold, former Confederate soldier. While not as showy as Paxton, his is a more intense, quiet menace that is nonetheless charismatic as it is unsettling. He's captivating, and it's obvious how he can control and corral the rest of the vamps. Also shout out to Joshua John Miller as Homer, who plays a similar role to Kirsten Dunst in Interview with the Vampire. An old man in a young boy's body, and plays him with both snotty indifference and true dangerous malice, especially when he affects an exaggerated young lisp to entrance Caleb's sister when her and Caleb's father eventually track the group down.
My name's Homer, what's yours?
That leads to one of the best and by far most tense encounters in the film. Now, the film isn't perfect. Sometimes it's low-budget shows, despite Bigelow's best efforts. And the controversial blood-chint fusion subplot towards the end is a bit convenient. Not enough to completely suspend disbelief, and even works in some ways as the thematic coming back to the light aspect to Caleb's story, as well as adding tons more to the tension to the final sequence. However, it still is a bit convenient nonetheless. The thing that suffers the most, however, is the love story, which has no real time to grow, and goes from just met and is kind of a creep to now we're bound forever. And it's a bit jarring and hard to emotionally invest in, especially when it becomes the focal point of the drama in the last act, and it's even the basis of the final freeze frame closing shot. It doesn't ruin the movie, and the actors have good enough chemistry, if only the script could have done more to complement their performances. Unfortunately for Bigelow, due to the distributor going out of business, it led to the film getting almost no promotion and being shown on limited screens, earning only $3.5 million back from its $5 million budget. In fact, due to a rights snafu from DEG going under, it has led to rights issues, making it impossible to find legally on streaming. It is available, however, on DVD and Blu-ray. It's a cult classic that's definitely influenced, directly or indirectly, depictions of vampires over the years. However, while it's hard to view at the moment, if you have the opportunity, check out Near Dark for a bloody good time. So if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. And if you have any suggestions for us, please leave them in the comments below.